droopy because I flew all last night coming back. Well, I didn't have to act as a passenger. Came back from Hawaii. We'll throw out some experiences there. Some of you may have seen I did a little show last night. Would have been late for everybody else. It was late in Hawaii when I did it. But anyway, welcome to Fearless Flight Live this week. Again, we got our able-bodied participants here. We got Eric on the bass, Diane on guitar, and Dieter. We can't just say Dieter is our technical expert anymore. Dieter is just as, if not more qualified than I am. He's a licensed therapist, and I want you to know, I want everybody to know that he's more than just a pretty face. And he and I collaborate a lot. That's a big part of the changes that we've made in Fearless Flight since he's been involved. Whew. It'll be 4 years next May, I think. March or April, something like that. Anyway, so I wanted to acknowledge Dieter tonight, and Diane's not just a pretty face either. She's Eric. We can't even call him a pretty face. So, but
so this is yes,
anyway, this is the weekly show for, if you're joining us for the first time, welcome. This is the show for people who are afraid to fly, or people who know someone's afraid to fly, or if you just like to talk about aviation and learn about some interesting facts about what goes on in the aviation industry. And we've got, oh my gosh, we had up all the experience here. We got a wealth of it here, and in that and psychotherapy. So without further ado, you see on the screen there, that's our symbol for our Fearless Flight Birds of a Feather Facebook group with the link down below it. If you have not joined and are not a member, we highly encourage you to go over there and register, and we'll bring you into the group. And once you're in there, you can share your own experiences. You can both leave and receive information and talk about all things fear of flying. And we've got a great group over there, and we're adding more and more to our agenda for that group over there as we continue to build out the Fearless Flight site. Tonight, we're going to offer you a little quick survey, a 30-second poll. So if you want to, if you're on here right now, or if you are watching the replay, you can go over to that link that you see on the screen right there and take a quick poll about flying. I can tell you from personal experience, having flown to Hawaii over this past week, not so many people flying out there yet, despite the fact that the airplanes have been reported to be probably the safest place out there. So we're going to close the thing up tonight a little bit, always with a little bit of the COVID stuff, and see if we can't help you get your courage up to not only get over your fear of flying, but get over your fear of catching COVID out there. Got a little coach's corner thing here. We're talking about creating a flight plan, which is the thing that we do in my coaching sessions, in our online classes, in our live classes. What the goal is to help people out there build a flight plan, create a flight plan, and we'll talk about that process. And then last, in the Aviation News Roundup, that's where we'll bring it all together, and we'll talk about the updates with the COVID-19. So.
All right, okay. I just want to make sure I put the poll question, the link to the poll question, into the comments already. And so you can just click over there. It literally takes 30 seconds. And we're going to talk about another survey, I think also a little bit later, right? The National Geographic one. So please go and let us know. And also I want to say hi to, oh my God, Tracy's on, Michelle's on, Jim, hi Jim. We got who else is? Hey, there's Sue from Boston. Hey, we got a lot of people joining internet. So why don't you, Ron, take it?
Do you want me to share, or do you want to flip through them?
You know what? It'd be better if you shared, then I have time to do the other one.
Everybody play a little traveling music while I remind myself how to do this share, finding the controls. And we're, I think you have to give me, create.
I'm not sharing. I'm not
You're
sharing.
not sharing. Okay.
No.
Yeah.
He doesn't want to share.
I do not have that option.
Well, I'm happy to share it. So don't, so
yeah,
let's just
I don't have
started.
the share. I don't have the control Oh, there it is. It just popped up. Honest, I wasn't there before. So
Really, Mom?
this has got to look funny. Look at watching me duck down and do all this stuff here because I'm dodging my camera.
We're playing whack-a-mole.
Dieter, fix your name so you guys don't look like fraternal twins.
I know. Dieter, your title is Captain Ron.
Right on. There you go.
El name es Dieter.
So there are different time periods, I guess.
There we go.
All right. So we're seeing.
Yeah, you're not seeing it yet. You will in one. Play from current slide.
Perfect.
You're still seeing not the right.
The presenter view and not the.
Okay, let me stop the share and change the screen.
Okay, I will say this.
This is what inspires courage or confidence in all of our viewers out there.
Well, not being afraid to make.
There you go. Courage, fearlessness.
There
Thank
you
you.
go.
Thank you. All right. Enough said. Okay, so here we are, and so you can see that now, right? Creating flight plan for success.
Nope, we're seeing a beautiful apple background.
Well, it looks like Malachi, kind of.
Yeah, a little bit.
Well, the third time is charm, or so they say.
Well, we are getting to know all your screen real estate down there in Phoenix, Ron.
I've only got one left,
Well,
so unless I do the right. Okay.
So as they're doing that this morning at my house, it was 48 degrees. For all of you watching around the country, it's not always 115 here in Arizona.
It is not.
It's 48. It was 48 this morning.
Okay, so here we are. All right, making decisions under stress. So whenever as you listen to these few slides that I've put together here, what I want you to do is remember that this is all about stress. You know, we call it fear of flying, we call it flying anxiety, we call it a number of things, but it's really related to you manage your level of arousal. And we know that we have a couple of systems, the sympathetic nervous system, which is the one that, like the accelerator in a car, it gets us amped up a little bit, not always for fearful purposes. Sometimes if you're playing a basketball game, you got to amp up a little bit to peak all your senses and make better decisions and make better plays. And then the parasympathetic nervous system, which is what calms us down. So we're going to talk about managing stress and how to do something in advance. All right. And we call it our flight plan. So, and the reasons that we use simulators in aviation is to prepare us for making decisions. And Eric and I were talking about that just before, or Eric and I and Diane actually, because all three of us as crew members use simulation. And Eric can volunteer there, like, or Diane, how much time do you spend in training, practicing things that you'll never, both of you actually, that you'll probably never get to do in real life? Hopefully.
Well, for me, pretty much once we get the basics in our training and for my airline in 31 days, almost most things that we do in training for the emergency situations, I've talked to flight attendants who've been flying for 10, 15, 20 years and they've never encountered it. But we do it in our initial training. We do it when we have line checks. We go back once a year for recurrent, and we are tested on a number of different emergency situations, drills as far as water evacuations and prepared and unprepared. So we're doing all of those things all the time. It's always a worst case scenario. I think I mentioned a while back that when we, as flight attendants, when we're preparing to take off and when we're preparing to land, we have a system of questions we have to ask ourselves as far as what are we going to do if. And so it's constant preparing for things that are probably never going to happen.
And that's exactly what we're talking about for fear of flying here. And I don't know if you had anything else extra to add, Eric, about that, but just.
No, Same
amount of time that we do that. We create simulations.
about the same deal as Diane. We're every 9 months in the simulator, 11 to 12 hours over 2 days, every 9 months, plus classroom time, plus independent study time, plus as Diane said, line checks, and that's where a qualified flight attendant or pilot flies along with you in a normal operation and makes sure that you are conducting things properly per procedure and in a standard fashion. And we always make jokes about it. Funny little abnormalities always come during line checks, and they see how you handle that. And then they also want to see that you haven't reinvented how the whole airline is supposed to work, and your way is the best, the cowboy method or whatever. And so they're doing that, sometimes announced, sometimes unannounced, in a random fashion. Both the pilots and the flight attendants are getting line checks.
So we in September, we just passed the 117th anniversary of powered flight when the Wright brothers flew their first powered airplane. And what we did, or what we do, is we imagine over all those years, we collect data, and we collect data that shows what's likely to go wrong. And in addition to that, what's likely to go wrong that would really be problematic and cause me to become overloaded. Is that fair to say, Diane?
Yeah, definitely.
So the whole point is, and we make a big deal out of this, if you plan to fail, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. I first heard that in related to financial planning. If you don't have a plan, you do have a plan, you're going to fail because you're not going to know how to assess where you're at and all that. So that's the thing. And the airlines have a history, and this is not exactly the point of tonight, but we'll mention it. The airlines have a history of being one of the most highly trained professions in the world because of our need sometimes to substitute a crew member with another crew member on a team where they may not have ever met or worked before 30 minutes after before they met. So, okay. So this whole subject and little mini session, the coaching session we did tonight, came from a researcher, a neuroscientist actually. And what happened was his name happened to be Daniel Levitin, and he tells a story about how he realized he locked himself out of his house after forgetting his car key, that he left his car keys in here when he went over to visit a friend across the street. He stayed longer than he wanted, didn't realize it until he came back to the house, lived in some cold weather climate. And so now he's locked out of his house. He did have his cell phone. And so he debated calling a locksmith, but as you can imagine, you could freeze to death waiting even an hour or hour and a half for a locksmith. And it was late and really cold. So he elected to just find a rock. He had a basement window that he could break and get in, and then he taped some cardboard back over it. And compounding his problem was, and what led him to that solution was the fact that he was flying to Europe the next day on an 8-hour flight and needed to get up early, and he had to have his passport. Otherwise, he could have spent the night at his friend's house. But he had his suitcase and his passport in the house. So, like I said, his quickest option was to break the window and then fix that up, and then call somebody to repair it during the time that he was gone as quickly as possible. So now, not only is he added some stress to his life, but now he's added to his to-do list. So now tomorrow he's going to be further encumbered by things that he's got to do. So you can imagine, and many of you have been out there, you know what it's like when you have a flight coming up and you're anxious about it. He didn't get much sleep. And when we're under those conditions and stress is in abundance, the brain releases cortisol, which then causes us to modulate and release adrenaline and raises our heart rate, and all things that happen that are not really conducive to sleeping that night. And getting good rest. And probably the biggest one, and the one that's most overlooked by all of us, is the fact that when you are under even a small amount of stress, it clouds your thinking. It actually reduces your IQ. they have actually done tests for people under various levels of stress to show that they do not function IQ-wise as well as they do at other times. So woke up the next morning, too little sleep, worrying about the hole in the window and the fact that he had to call somebody and get it repaired. And his thinking was clouded. And the paradox is, when your thinking is clouded, you least recognize that your thinking is clouded. And so that adds to the issue of making good decisions when you're under stress. And again, that's what we're talking about here. So he arrived at the airport the next morning to check in, like I did last week in my Hawaii trip. Got all the way out there, and he realized that he'd forgotten his passport, which he needs to get to board the airplane. He raced home in the snow and ice, got back in time, just in time to get the last seat in the last row. And Eric and Diane can tell you what a joy that is if you get stuck deadheading there. You lose the ability to recline that magnanimous 1.5 inches to give you that restful sleep on the way over, in his case, 8-hour flight over to Europe. And so he used that time to think about, what could I do next time to prevent that scenario coming forward or going forward like that. And in the next month after he returned from Europe, he had lunch with a good friend of his who was Daniel Kahneman. And many of you may recognize that name because that's one of my favorite books about making quality decisions and judgment when you're under stress, and how the brain works and all that. And so they were talking about that. And when he told the story, Daniel it triggered Daniel, and he said he calls that practicing protective hindsight. And another word for that, there's another researcher that he shared who calls it a pre-mortem. And if you think about it, a post-mortem is something that we do literally after somebody dies often, but a post-mortem for some kind of an aircraft accident, for something, to see what happened and look at what we could have done. So Kahneman was playing with the idea of coming up with developing a pre-mortem, where you think forward, and we all like to think that we do that, but when we anticipate, particularly if you're under stress like flying, you're not able to think about things that you would do to prevent that stress from building. Most of us put ourselves in the situation, and we use our simulators to create a stressful scenario, and then we just ruminate over it and think about it over and over and over again. And this is just another way of sharing with you tonight the whole goal of Fearless Flight, whether it's coaching, whether it's the flight harmonizer, the Fearless Flight Kit, whether it's our online classes, or whether it's our live classes, is to help you reduce your stress and make better decisions and anticipate things that might come up for you during the course of your flight to help you reduce your stress in advance. And Dieter and I have put our heads together since he and I have been involved here, and look for opportunities to do this for fearful flyers. And I told Dieter that the interesting thing about helping people as the pilot with their fear of flying is it's a parallel. There's a parallel between what we do as pilots. We've already touched on that, the way Diane and Eric and I all had to prepare for our jobs. And so with Dieter's help, we put together a system that we call the Fearless Flight Method that speaks to what training is all about and how you can actually extend what we do in the profession of professional flying or being a flight attendant. And the brain is above all a simulator. That's the good news. The bad news is that it simulates, in the case of people who have anxiety disorders or such as fear of flying, it simulates bad things that are going to happen to you, and you continue to ruminate that and over that. And if you can think about it, if you could change that energy from worrying about what might happen, which will probably never happen, into thinking about situations and strategies that you're going to use when you're confronted with stressful situations, which is what we do. Like I said, coaching online and live classes, you'd put your time to a much better use. So the task is, you've heard us talk about triggers before. Triggers are the first place that you can do an intervention on yourself. Those are the things that say, I have people write down or share with me what bothers you about flying and get as specific as possible. And then we talk about if it's a mechanical trigger, like something that would be would benefit by learning a little bit more about the technical parts of flying, we deal with that. Or if it's an emotional situation, then we deal with it more in a mindful way to help people to stop the rumination process. So whatever it is, we identify the triggers and the story that you tell yourselves about that, and then we help you create a pre-mortem, or what we call a fearless flight plan, so that you could employ that. Most people are surprised when I tell them that you're not going to get over your anxiety due to flying typically in one flight. It's going to be a process. But what you do get is when you start this process using the Fearless Flight Plan and the method, which provides a framework for that, which you see on the screen there, is what you do is you establish a way of giving yourself confidence now that when you do fly, when anxiety does come up and your triggers are activated, you'll be able to deal with them in a much healthier way. Okay. There's just a little segue here. When one of the things that Levitan mentioned in the information that I read of his was they did a squirrel experiment, because his issue was finding lost keys for the most part, as is mine, or finding your lost passport. And so there was a study done one time, and they looked at squirrels and how they're masters at finding nuts they may have buried 5 years ago. And so to rule out the fact that they were being assisted by their olfactory senses, their sense of smell, they actually disabled the smell in these poor little squirrels, and they were still able to activate it. And that's neither here nor there, but we have the same kind of mechanism in our brain. It's called the hypothalamus, and that's what helps us remember where we put our keys. But unfortunately, unlike the squirrels, our nuts don't stay in one place, and they like our keys and things like that, they're on the move all the time. And unless you've got Find My Phone, or I have a device called a Tile that I can use with my smartphone to help me find keys, things that I've tagged to that, we need another process for that. And so that was the outcome of all this, is Levitan came up with a process that he could build up a fearless flight plan, if you will, for places where he was vulnerable, like moving his keys or leaving them inadvertently somewhere else. And I can't remember if I mentioned it during the talk here, but for me, when I was flying, one of the most important things you have is your official company ID. And if you lose that, they charge you big money right now, and you have to go talk to somebody because of the impact that can have, or implications with security.
Yeah,
and
so somebody you have to talk to is the FBI, and they don't find it very funny.
Yeah. And when I remember, whenever I would lose it, most of the time, except for a couple of times, I would find it right away. But my badge was either clipped to my shirt with a little clip, or it was in my wallet. And if I ever lost it, I could find it in the drawer next to the counter where I was doing all this. I had put it somewhere other than where I normally did it. So that's the whole point that Levitan came up with this. And the parallel that we're trying to make for you is how to use the Fearless Flight method to prepare yourself for flying. And I think that's one of the big things that people are surprised, is that you can prepare in advance. You don't have to wait until you get near the airplane to do that. So, as I mentioned before, we're not squirrels, and the items that we need to track down are often not nuts, but things like keys and wallets that move around. And just last week, as I mentioned, I was going to Hawaii, and I packed at the last minute, rushed myself out, got in the Uber, got all the way out there, and couldn't have happened right after getting in the Uber. He made the turn into the airport. I remember that I didn't have my passport with me. I had to come all the way back. And fortunately for me, the loads are terrible, so I didn't get the last row there. And the flight was only about a third full. So we're going to talk about that a little bit here with.
I wanted to say something with regard to that sort of thing. When we talked about training and going through training and recurrent, when we went through training for the 31 days that we were in training, every single day when we went to class, our instructors, we had 8 items that we had to have. We had to have a watch, our badge, we had to have our passport, a flashlight, and then we had to have our EFAD, and then we also had to have what's called an IOQR. So every single morning, our instructors came around the room to ensure that we had all those items. And of course, when you're starting, you're thinking, oh my God, they think we're children. To make sure that we have all of our pencils and our crayons in our pencil box every single morning. However, when you get out to fly, as Eric and Ron was talking about, you have to have those things. If someone came through, a line check flight attendant or someone from the FAA decided they were going to get on your plane, they can ask you, let me see your items, and you have to show your watch, your badge, your passport, your flashlight, all the other kinds of things. So those 31 days built the habit of planning ahead so that when we actually got to flying, we had much less likelihood of our forgetting those kinds of things. So
our biggie was the flashlight. Could be a $20 million piece of equipment you're flying on, but
I'm telling you, I have a little tiny flashlight clipped to my lanyard, and I use that a lot.
And I'm telling you, as a passenger, I have a flashlight, at least one with me. I use a headlamp and a flashlight because I know if you're ever in a situation when you needed to get out of that thing and the lights are all out, you are going to be really, really glad that you put a flashlight with you and you know where it is and you can get to it in a heartbeat. That's the one thing I remember. So to kind of wind this up, the point is when you know better, you do better. And for the average person who's afraid to fly, you don't know better because you don't know a lot about flying. You don't know a lot about managing your thoughts. And so in the case of making better decisions, creating a game plan in advance is what this is all about. So whether you're preventing your keys from getting lost or managing your anxiety, the best plan is to have a game plan in there. And we call that the Fearless Flight plan. So other implications of this, there's another really interesting part from this, but I'm going to hold that for the future there and share with you some really interesting things that you'll want to come back for sure. It has to do with medications and what you should know before you go to your doctor and get medications or take them for that matter. So, all right, so let's move on into the rest of, let me stop the share there.
Yeah, I just want to jump in here, and I'm totally with you, Susan. The word pre-mortem is somewhat scary, but it's still, for me personally, it's preferable to a post-mortem. So.
I was going to bring that up too. I'm totally with her. We should use, what was the other one?
Well, we're calling it a flight plan, like in aviation, right?
Proactive.
The other one is perspective hindsight.
Perspective hindsight, that's much better. Pre-mortem sounds like, I know I'm going to croak anyway, so I'm going to wear clean underwear and a nice outfit. Yeah, that's
why we call it. That's why we call it.
Your mother always said, yeah.
Fearless Flight
car.
Plan.
Yeah,
okay?
of clean underwear.
Oh, that's hilarious. And so I just also just some comments here. I wonder if people fly to Catalina. So I'm not sure exactly where that is, but Michelle.
California.
Oh, Catalina Island. Catalina.
Yeah.
That's the screen I was sharing before.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Gotcha. And
good.
yeah. And we already are getting some people to jump on and fill out the poll question. So I just want to remind everybody that the link is already in the description. And so just hunt for it, take your 30 seconds and
okay. The last segment tonight, the aviation news update, we want to talk about 4 things. One of them is the fact that this comes from an article that says many Americans are unsure whether they'll fly again. Basically, people are still more worried, it appears, about the COVID-19 than they are about flying. And why wouldn't you be? Because I mean, we're up into record numbers of people getting ill every day and still people dying. The good news about the COVID-19 that I take from myself, forget about flying, it's just the fact that the death rate, we seem to be able to intercept the disease with people more and keep more people from dying. I think that the drug that the president took is one of the most successful ones to keep people off respirators, because the respirators were such a one-way trip when people got in there. But let's just talk again for the umpteenth time. and I can validate this. The airline, when I went to Hawaii put into force just they reopened out to the outside world there, I think at the 1st of October or the end of September, and you had to go take a test within 72 hours of your departure. And I ended up taking 2. One was the immediate one where they swab both nasal
antigen test.
passages. What's that?
That's the antigen test.
Oh no, the antigen is where they prick your
Blood
finger.
work. That's
Yeah,
blood.
yeah. And so I got a negative on both of them. They gave me a little slip of paper, and I thought, God, that could be easy to give it to somebody else and manufacture it. And but they had a way of getting around that. Anyway, you put all this information in, you do a survey with the typical questions. Have you had a fever? Have you been ill or all that? Put it in there online, and then they give you a QR code. And I put the QR code just like I did a boarding pass. So now when I go fly, the airline, Fluent American, they didn't ask me to prove anything that I could get in there when I get over there, because if I don't, then I'm going to go in. If I can't prove that, I'm going to go into the 14-day quarantine thing. So when you arrive over there, that separates you. The people who did not do this in advance, they go one way, you go the other, and they're still going to get tested, but they're going to be quarantined. And so when I went through that, you show them the paperwork, and they give you a sheet of paper, official looking paper that they sign at the end of that. And then you still have to sit there and take the instant test, where they did the same thing. They swab both nostrils, and then you go through. Now, when I went to rent a car to drive back to Kona last night, what I found was, I'm glad I saved it. The sheet of paper that they gave me when I got in there, the rental car people asked me virtually the same questions. And they said, do you have that sheet of paper that they got? And I said, yes, I do. So keep everything you get if you do that. But the bottom line is, the airplanes are the cleanest part, the safest part about the whole trip. Getting through the airport to the airplane, and from the airplane through the airport, that's the place you'll be at the greatest risk. But everything I read, folks, is just use your mask. It's sad that so many people are both getting infected and infecting others, often loved ones. And if we just wear the mask, pretty much everybody is in agreement. It's not 100%, but it sure gives you a lot of protection and protects a lot of people. So that's my little bit of commercial for that. Now, so that was the first part. The second one was and I heard this from, there was some in the news when President Trump came out about brain fog, and either Eric or Diane, one of you had somebody that you knew.
One of my buddies. Yeah, one of my personal friends did get infected and wrote it out, and he's doing really well. But he says, I can attest that brain fog is real. And he said, medically speaking, not like we'd ever done it in our misspent youth. He says it's not like driving around drunk. It's like driving around after you've shot tequila. He said you just feel stupid. You drove somewhere and did something, but you can't remember why you did it or what exactly you did. He said, he says, my body is physically fine. He said, but I'm still in funny land in my head. So
Yeah.
So I'm curious, Ron, because you went through this. Susan was saying there's still false positive and negative. So I guess going to Hawaii seems there's a lot more barriers, so to speak, right? Or is that
it's the effort. I mean, the way I understand, you guys can help me with this, but the way I understand it, the incubation period is still 14 days. So the fact that I get a test within 72 hours, it doesn't mean that I'm not carrying the coronavirus. Okay, but it's a better guarantee, or not a guarantee, but it's a better assurance that at least you definitely weren't displaying symptoms when you got on, and it's a way to open the economy. And to me, that's why I want to keep emphasizing the best protection that you have and you can share with other people is wearing your doggone mask.
If I want to jump in just for a second, and I might have got that wrong earlier, but I think the nose swab is the antigen test. But whichever one is that quickie test, if it's positive, you're probably positive. If it's negative, you could be positive. But if you have the one that takes the 3-day, the longer result, the PCR, the polymerase chain reaction test, That's very accurate, positive or negative. And they're now coming up with evidence, and it's so hard. The more that people have had it and they track it, the better they figure it out, that asymptomatic people are in a super low percentage of spreaders, especially if they have masks on. In general, it's possible to do it, but the people that are asymptomatic are in a very low percentage of spreading it around. So that's a good thing to know, that somebody who seems fine, if they're not, is unlikely to give it to you.
Yeah.
And for me, just from a personal, I've been flying, I flew all the way January, February, March. I took 3 months off, and then I went back to flying the 29th of June. So July, August, September. So I've been flying for nearly 4 months, and always wear a mask, always do. And I've been flying a lot. And I had the blood test because I was just curious. I felt fine the whole time. I just was curious to see if I had it and was asymptomatic, and it was negative. I had no antibodies. So I've not had it, and obviously because I don't have the antibodies, I hadn't developed it. So for people who are concerned about making one flight or one trip, here I am, and I've been flying solid for 4 months, and I'm still fine, and wearing the mask and washing my hands. All those simple kinds of things really do make a difference.
Yeah, and everybody in my experience on the airplane was disciplined. Nobody was everybody was very cognizant of keeping each other safe in there. And I was really just kind of bothered about having the mask on the whole time. Didn't bother me at all.
You get used to it, believe me. You have to. We do.
Really not a big deal. And
Yeah.
and we had a little bit of a snack there. So okay, so moving on, coughing dummies, not to be confused with airline pilots. Coughing dummies help Boeing and United. So Eric, you had a little bit of information about that.
So I was reading about this today, and the travel portion of the United States Air Force, and I think it's Scott Air Force Base in Illinois, that sets up.
Yeah, they coordinate all of the non-military airlift.
But when they got to move their people, so they set this up. So they were trying to get this study, and they worked this out with both United and Boeing, put this together. And they ran this test on various narrow body aircraft, both Airbus and Boeing's, where we had talked earlier about results from data and the numbers showing that the spread in airplanes is highly improbable. Well, they took the airplanes and flew them around for 30 hours, flying around, and 24 hours of testing on the ground. And you can see the setup up here. And they got this dummy that's probably going to get in trouble because you don't have a freaking mask on.
Just to add on here, they turned a narrow body airplane into a laboratory, basically.
Into a laboratory. So they flew this around, and I made a joke earlier about all the dummies having peanut allergies, and they served them peanuts, but that's not true. They did have the dummies all rigged so they could cough and spread aerosol all over the place, which was colored dye and traceable, so they could see the patterns of when the pressurization system was operating and the airplane was flying, how the aerosol would be distributed and what the ventilation system did to it, how it was trapped, and all that. So this is physical evidence of what the numbers are telling us now is very low. And the report is done, but they haven't released the results because it's being peer reviewed, analyzed to make sure they didn't step in any big holes. But the initial people talking about the study say it's very favorable, in line with the numbers, and it will be released soon, showing physical evidence that lines up with the data that the transmission rate in an airplane would in fact be very, very low.
Very low.
Okay, and then the last article we had was about the effectiveness of the airlines and how they're cleaning and disinfecting the thing. And that's another one. That's the cleanest airplane I've ever been on in my life. The ones that twice that I've flown during the COVID-19 virus there. So they've got it down to a science. I mean, you got to imagine their motivation is, if they get any bad press out of this,
right,
it's going to drive them back the other way. So
and
anyway.
when our passengers board, we give them their own little packet of a hand sanitizer wipe. So,
Yeah.
and if you want to, you can have two. And the passengers not only with their hands, but they'll wipe down their seats, even on top of the fact that our cleaners will come in the aircraft and they'll be cleaning everything. I mean, the bins and the.
Yeah, that was another thing they
no,
gave,
it's
they
just
gave us,
amazing.
the
Yeah.
little hand sanitizer
Yeah.
as well. And and again, the two most important things you can do is wash your hands thoroughly and wear your mask. So, all right. Unless we've got any other questions to hit on, Dieter.
Well, we got a lot of comments about a lot of our viewers getting tested for different reasons, work, surgery, all sorts
Yeah.
of different.
Right.
And as far as flying on an airplane is concerned, it's more about, other people not following the rules, or
Yeah.
that is really the number one concern.
And again, my experience was, I think everybody's getting the word that, they must have mentioned that the flight attendants must have mentioned it 2 or 3 or 4 times during the initial briefings. They said, if you don't comply, you're not just going to get thrown off of this one. You're going to be put on a list and you're not going to get to fly with us anymore. So people are taking it seriously. And I think that it's, we're at that point. Plus the news with all the spread and stuff like that, I think has helped as well. So, okay, 2 things we want to remind you. Sunday morning at 2:00 in the morning, if you live someplace where you have to turn your clocks spring forward, fall back,
Back.
you get another extra hour of sleep. So don't forget that. We never change here. Hawaii never changes, and part of where I grew up in Indiana never changes. And the other thing is, next week is the big election in the US of A. So we are going to purposely not have the show on Tuesday, November 3rd. We're going to have the next show is going to be Wednesday, November 4th. So we will see you back here next week at 6:30 Pacific and 9:30 Eastern for another episode of Clueless Ron, Fearless Flight Live. And thanks for joining us. And
foggy Fearless Flight.
Yeah, brain fog.
Yeah, that may be a bad omen. So anyway, see you everybody. Have a great week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good night.